Hi, I'm Len Epp from LeanPub, and in this episode of the Front Matter podcast, I'll be interviewing Pablo Bermejo. Based in Asturias, Spain, Pablo is a principal software architect and distinguished technologist at independent IT services provider DXC Technology. A popular conference speaker, he is also a writer who has published numerous articles and white papers on a wide variety of topics in a number of fields. You can follow him on Twitter at Paibolsang and check out his website at dev.to/Paibolsang, and that's Peibolsang. Pablo is the author of the LeanPub book, Building Software Platforms, A Guide to SaaS Transition with AWS. In the book, Pablo provides a guide to a new architectural style that can be used to help companies build internal platforms that empower their developers to build services and provide solutions to problems in alignment with the organization's own needs and tempo. In this interview, we're going to talk about Pablo's background and career, professional interests, his book, and at the end, we'll talk a little bit about his experience as a self-published book author. So thank you very much, Pablo, for being on the LeanPub Front Matter podcast.
Thanks for having me, Len. I'm excited to be here with you today.
I always like to start these interviews by asking people for their origin story. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about where you grew up and how you first became interested in things like computers and technology.
Right. Okay. I consider myself a privileged person because I was born, raised, and I went to college and I work everything within 20 square kilometers, Asturias. So I was born in Asturias, I grew up in Asturias, went to college in Asturias, and I worked in Asturias. And everything happened, for those who know that part of the region in Spain is small, is very rural, and, it's like, I had a great opportunities to grow here. And so I first became interested in computing when I was a teenager. So that is the early 90s. I'm 40 years old now, so that is in the early 90s, where a friend of the family, back then, it was very rare, especially in this region, to have a computer. And I remember it was a fellow teacher of my parents. My parents are teachers, and one of the fellow teachers he had a spare computer. I mean, it was rare to have one, but this person had a spare computer, and that spare computer he gave it to us, and that's how I started to get familiar with computing, and that's where I started to learn some basic programming back then, on my own, with a hardbook copy of Basic, and that's where I started to discover the infinite possibilities of programming a computer. And of course, I also, as I said, I'm very privileged because since I was very young, I knew what I wanted to do for a living, and anything related to computers. And it just happened that, again, in Asturias, there is you can go to the college and study computer sciences, and I became a software engineer. So that's a little bit of my background.
And you mentioned the college there. It was the University of Oviedo. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes.
Yeah. For people who might not know, you sort of modestly said college, but this is a sort of university going back to, I think, the 16th or 17th century.
Oh yeah, actually, yeah. And this is one of the things that happened over here, is that you can even visit the buildings back then. I mean, the historic there's a historic building of the 15th century. It's one of the oldest universities around in Spain, and for sure, that's it.
And so you mentioned, so you're fortunate enough to have this computer, and you had an actual like hard copy book that you learned Basic from.
Yes.
I'm curious that this podcast has over the years become a little bit of a sort of time capsules of people from different eras and places around the world learning sort of getting to know programming and things like that, because so many of our LeanPub authors are into that.
Right.
And so were you I'm just curious a little bit about, to dig into that a little bit deeper. Were you a tinkerer even before you got the computer?
What? Sorry, I didn't get it.
A tinkerer, someone who takes things apart and puts them back together and things like that.
No, not much. No.
Okay.
I wasn't that kind of person. No. Okay. I was all my life being very focused on getting my school subjects passed, and that's all. Yeah. And some sports, I'm a sportsman, and I always, in my free time, even since I was a kid, I always try to do a sports.
Okay, okay. And did you begin by making games? Were those your first programs, or was it
Well,
something else?
I remember I tried even, back then. I don't even remember. It was G Basic or Q Basic, the language where you could do some drawings. I don't even remember now. But yeah, of course, I was trying to do shapes. I remember perfectly trying to do shapes and human shapes and buildings with programming back then. And I got very frustrated because even with manuals, I couldn't do it. So that I think that makes me a bad programmer. But later I tried to fix that by going to college, and then I became officially a bad programmer. But but yeah, I've got a very first experience um, in my early years, teenager years. But then uh, I very very quickly recognized that that was my future.
It's really interesting when I love thinking about this sort of like history of computing and things like that and people's first encounters with them. And I remember one of the things that like might be sort of it's difficult to convey to people is how exciting it was to be able to sort of have an impact on what you were seeing on the screen yourself. Even the most rudimentary thing, like I remember someone I knew had got a computer. This was in the 80s, early 80s, and he typed out like sort of pixel by pixel an ice hockey team's logo and then printed it out and said, "Look what I made." And it was just like these crude blocks,
Blocks,
kind of made
exactly.
an approximation. But the idea that you yourself could type something into a computer and then make it on the screen, happen on the screen, was just magical.
It's magical. It's one of the. I'll be honest with you. It's one of the best feelings I mean, personally, I could have is you know. There is a lot of self-realization when you try to solve a problem and you try to attack the problem and then codify it and design a solution, build it as you want to build it, and then it works or it doesn't work, but it's yours. And I use this a lot with the team I work with. Is all these kind of systems that we build, software pieces that we build, are kind of some like our babies. And it's like we design them, we take care of them, we make them grow, and sometimes there is this feeling of ownership that that what you're building is yours. And it's as I said, there's a lot of self-realization when you are coding and when you are programming, for sure.
And what was your first job in software engineering?
Yeah, my first job was as an IBM Lotus Domino developer in 2003. So I was a fresher from the university. So I graduate from the university. I think I even, and this is something that usually happens over here, is that I even graduate after I got a job. So I got a job, and then 1 year later I graduated. And yeah, it was an IBM Lotus Domino developer. Yeah, the first couple of years. It's a technology that's no longer, well, I'm sure it exists. I actually I didn't check. But back then it was very popular, and the creator of Lotus Notes, it's Ray Osi, who to me is one of the greatest software minds of all time. And only because that person invented that, I was happy working with Lotus, IBM Lotus. And the technology itself was interesting. Well, if you think about it now, it's a NoSQL database. Back then it was like, well, everything was Oracle and everything was like that. And back then Lotus was like, okay, I'm a documents database. And I was like, okay, you were the MongoDB and the DocDB of the early 2000s. It's interesting. It allowed me to learn cool stuff. I learned, to be honest, I learned Ajax and web development with Ajax with Lotus Domino, because the Domino servers, you could have a JSON representation of a view that was sent by the server. And I used that to start playing with JavaScript Ajax and prototype back in 2006. So that was actually kind of was my escape valve for Lotus Domino, and because the technology itself, as I said, is not very. interesting or compelling. But that part of it where you could build web applications and use Domino as a backend with JSON, that was pretty interesting.
And pardon me. And it's interesting to talk to people about their careers. And so a lot of people, their way into their first jobs is through, startups and stuff like that. And some other people, the sort of other side of the sort of coin there is big companies. And I gather you've been with big companies for much of your career.
Yeah, very much. And I think it's just circumstantial because of the local market. I wouldn't say Spain. Spain in general is fine. It is true that it's a market which is dominated by the big corps, and especially the big consultancy corps. The Accentures, the DXEs, the Deloittes, and other local players. But it has been always dominated by large corporations, and the opportunities that you get back then, not now. Now is very different. There's a lot of small startups and product companies but back in 2000s, basically that was the only choice. And especially where I lived, again, Asturias, the opportunities were very reduced. You could only work for Capgemini, DXC, back it was CSC, HP, and that's it. For smaller companies, yes, but they were struggling. Now the situation is totally different. There's a lot of cool startups that are doing cool things. They are going well with organic growth and everything. But back then, the market was dominated by the big corps. Yeah,
that's interesting. That actually is a good segue into the next question, which is something that comes up relatively frequently on the podcast, which is if you were starting out now, let's say you were 18 years old and you were just out of school and you were intending to have a career just like the one that you've had, would you formally study computer science at university, or would you choose a different path?
No, I would go to university, and I got this. This is very, very clear. So university gives you something that some other ways of learning can't give you, which is fundamentals. And don't get me wrong, I'm all for programming, boot camps and things like that. I love them. They are very good. I think, and this is something that I talk about a lot in my work, is the boot camps help you hack the learning curve. So you can learn how to build an application very quickly, which is very, very helpful for entry-level people who want to see something working in 2 weeks. It's like, no, there a lot of people cannot spend mentally or even financially spend 5 years learning something, and at the very end of the career, they build an application, right? Many people leave, burn out, and in the way they want to see something and say, why I'm learning calculus, why I'm learning maths and algebra, why I'm learning all that. I want to build an effing application, right? That's fine. So for those kind of people, bootcamps is a very good solution. You can learn something, you can have like quick satisfaction because in 2 weeks or even 1 month, 6 months, you get a good learning path, and you are kind of hacking the learning curve. But the important thing is that you are not done. Now you need to learn all the fundamentals. So at the end of the day, the path you take through the university and the path you take through boot camps is the same. The goal, the point where you want to reach is the same, which is full understanding of the technology, full understanding of the fundamentals, building applications, resolving real problems. Which way do you want to take? Either the long way with the university and at very end of the university learn how to build application, or hack the learning curve. It's a shortcut. Then you get the satisfaction, but don't forget you need to learn the fundamentals too. Again, different curves, different paths for different people. Personally, I would choose the university way. Well, it's my mentality, and I think it fits well with my way of thinking.
And just to sort of go into a little bit of detail there for anyone listening who might be sort of facing this choice wherever they are in their career, maybe they've got another career, now they're choosing maybe to become a software developer or something like that. What do you mean by the fundamentals?
The fundamentals of computer sciences. This is, how computers from physical, how computers work inside, what is the von Neumann architecture, to binary programming and logic, all these kind of things, from how programming languages work, how databases work, all these kind of things, all those fundamentals. That you don't need that if you are trying to build an application with React or TurboLinks. You don't need that. But in the long term, you kind of need it. It's like, okay, you as you start solving um, larger and larger challenges and problems, you realize that you need that kind of fundamentals to be able to think, with an open mind and actually be able to resolve larger problems. So the fundamentals are fundamental.
Yeah, and that, no, that's really interesting. And when it comes to, I mean, I mentioned, the difference between, big companies and startups and things like that. And is it typical for the big companies to, when it comes to sort of entry level positions, to require someone to have a computer science degree? I mean, in 2021 nowadays.
No. The gatekeeping days are over. Those gatekeeping days are over. So my position is the following. I hire people to my team. So, well, I'm an architect who happens to be a manager as well, basically, if I find somebody from the university who lacks real hands-on experience and they know they've got a strong base in the fundamentals and the foundations, but they lack real hands-on experience on building applications, I would give them a training course, or I would give them like 6 months period for them to catch up, right? On the other hand, if I find somebody from the market, well, from the market is a very horrible name. I hate to say that, but you know what I mean, right?
I know what you mean. I do that sometimes too.
I hate it. Sometimes these kind of words, I try to eliminate them from my vocabulary sometimes, but you know what I mean, right?
I know,
So
yeah.
if I find somebody uh, who, again, coming from a coding boot camp and without a college university title, I don't care. I hire them, and in turn, I consider myself, whether it makes sense or not, pay them the university. It's like, if I realize this is a potential good candidate or good people that is productive and they've got future and a glittering, promising career, maybe I consider to say, yeah, maybe we need to give these people the fundamentals. So why not the company funds their training. So that's my approach to hiring. Again, two different paths for very different people. It's driven by context, financial situation, life background. So and again, I'm not a gatekeeper. The gatekeeping days are over. I consider that gatekeeping is very dangerous for our industry. Our industry needs more, I don't know, writers. They need more better communicators, actors, people from science. And, we need to nurture our industry with different point of views, because if everything we've got is engineers from the university, then it's going to be very, self, enthusiastic between ourselves, and I don't think it's doing any good to the industry. We need more people with an external eyes that can help say, hey guys, you engineers with a title, and engineer title, you guys, you are not doing this right. I mean, this industry needs some push with some other things that we engineers can see, because it's not our background, and we need those kind of people in the industry.
That's really fascinating, actually. One of the big questions of the day right now in sort of late 2021, when it comes to gatekeeping and finding new people and, sort of widening the prospects and bringing diversity onto teams. What do you think about remote work?
Right, remote work. I've got mixed feelings. So as a worker, yeah, I think kind of. I'm one of those people who want to see other people. I'm a social animal. I need to be with people. So could I accept a job which is 100% remote? Oh my God. Yeah, it depends on the conditions. I would ask 100 questions about when can I see my team? When can I reconvene with them? I mean, are there any events where a team can go together? Is there any office I can go? And so I need to see people. But on the other hand, I'm very, very comfortable working remotely. So I'm kind of one of those people who like a hybrid mode, right? For my hiring self, totally. I don't care where the people is as long as they do their job. I mean, so the pandemics was good to spot micromanagers. So all those people who got nervous during the pandemics because no, I want my people. No, in the office, and I need to chat with my people every day because I need to know what they are doing. Well, that was a very good micromanager trap. So all of them appear from and show from the caves, and of course I'm not one of those. And as long as the team is doing a good job, even if it is a schedule where they say, hey Pablo, I work 4 hours in the morning and 5 hours in the night, that's fine. We've got situations like that in my team now, where even people say, well Pablo, I need to go, and my family is from Canary Islands, so would you mind if I go and I redo my life with my family in Canary Islands? And I said, go now.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. It's really interesting. And this is a subject I think we could probably talk about for a very long time.
Yeah,
But particularly when you bring up, the idea of someone whose job was kind of contingent on the sort of artificial environment that people were working in, that was maybe a legacy of past requirements, but wasn't really necessary anymore. And it's even baked into these sort of like these kind of conventions can become baked into language in the ways that for people, for example, even I would say like sort of with some prejudice, even now people will say it's time to get back to work. And what
yes.
they mean is back to the office.
Exactly.
But it is conflated in people's minds, right? And you see it in the discourse, particularly in the United States. There's been this whole thing about sweatpants. I don't know if you've noticed that articles are always like,
Yes,
it's time
yes.
to get out. And what is with this obsession with sweatpants? I mean, but I mean, when you can ask it sort of in a funny way, but when you try to take it actually seriously, like what are these people concerned about? And it's like, without the kind of uniform and the ornamentation, they kind of don't see work really happening. And it's just interesting for people. I have a very sort of straightforward mindset when it comes to stuff like that. Like, is it work or isn't it? And I don't need a water cooler, to
Totally.
prove I'm working, or I definitely don't need a commute to prove that I'm
Exactly.
working.
Show me the outcomes. Show me what you're
Yeah,
doing.
yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
But
Deliver, meet the milestones, and all that kind of things. But
yeah,
totally.
exactly. But as you said at the beginning, but that's your hiring self knows all these things, but you also have to know that people have certain personalities, and that's an important thing to take into account. And, some people need to be around other people to kind of just every once in a while, or even every day, to get their juices flowing. Other people, you fly them out like a kite and tie a rock to the bottom and come back a
Yeah.
while later and reel them back in. And they're like, here's the best, output you've ever seen.
Exactly.
And you just
Exactly.
need to take that into account. Actually, that one just on one last question on this kind of broad area, though. You mentioned the pandemic, and I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about. I mean, it's been almost 2 years now, but how that affected you where you live.
Well, at the beginning, that Spain was hit hard. Well, but like any other country, and I'm lucky again because the region where I live is not very crowded. As I said, it's kind of rural. I mean, it's not 100% rural. It's a lot of rural space, but it has been always probably at the tip of the spear in terms of good situations. It's like Asturias has been always good at the lowest levels of the virus spread in Europe. I'm not even talking about Spain, but I'm even talking about Europe. And now, well, so yeah, it hit hard. Well, to my family as well. We've got well, my grandparents passed because of the pandemic, but they were 97 and 98 years old. So, well, of course, they couldn't do it. But apart from that, yeah, well, now the situation is probably is the best in Europe, in Spain. I mean, if you look the news and if you read what's going on north of Europe, it's like, oh my God, what's this? Are we back again to 2020? Well, what is this? Spain is, I think, we are reaching a level of 95% of vaccinations.
Oh, wow.
That's impressive. And well, I think, well, historically, we've been, I guess there's some historical reasons why Spain always has been responding well to these kind of situations, which demand social cohesion. And Spain is a very social, cohesive country, and we are demonstrating that with these vaccination rates, which is putting our country in the lowest level of risk in Europe. So now the situation is quite good, of course. Now you can't think in terms of countries right now, because what I mean, Spain is good, but what happens if Portugal is not good, or France? It's like they are there. It's 400 kilometers away from Spain. It's like now you can't think in terms of frontiers. It's like, well, what happens in Africa? I mean, I don't care if Spain is 95% vaccinated. If Africa, and Morocco is 14 kilometers away from Spain, like, well, we shouldn't start. I mean, I would stop looking at these numbers from a country perspective. It's a species perspective. It's like, what happens if there's free movement of people around the world? What happens when we open our frontiers, and people from all over the world come to our country, which they should? And it's like, where's your number, Spain? I mean, now that's why I think when I look at those numbers, it's like, so what? I mean, if Spain is 95% vaccinated and then South Africa is only 20, it's like, well, what's the point? So it's very difficult. But again, I'm kind of lucky that in the current situation and circumstances, where it's still a little bit of country lockdowns, you can travel much, although it's opening. We are good. We are good.
Yeah, thank you very much for sharing all of that. It's yeah, it's always so kind of as you nicely captured the fact that it's the issue with the pandemic is simultaneously hyper local and global.
Totally, it's a very
And
good way of putting it, Len. Yeah.
yeah, and there's just no escaping either of those features of it. And I'm glad to hear things are going so well, at least now locally. And
Yep.
you when you said things were going well, it's like I was like, huh, I just realized I hadn't seen anything about Spain and COVID for a long time in the news, which is
Yeah.
the best news in a way you could get.
Yes.
And so just and so now moving on to the next part of the interview, we're getting closer to talking about your actual book. I wanted to talk just ask you a little bit about. I'm just looking at your LinkedIn profile here, and if you could just talk a little bit about the work you do day to day and that you've been doing for a while now. For I think it's DXC Assure.
That's right. Yes. So DXC Technology, again, is a large company. It's a global IT services company. I think now we are about 140,000 people, around that. We are very well known because we are a services company, but we are a little bit less known because we are also a software company, and there's a software group within DXC. I mean, it's a group of probably 4,000 people that we build software like a product, right? And we've been doing that for 25 years already. I mean, they have been doing it. I've been doing it only for about 8, 9 now with this team. I think it's 8 years, since 7 years with this team. But as a company, DXC has been building intellectual property for 25 years. And we are specialized in insurance software. So basically, large policy admin systems, and reinsurance and broking, quotation and tariffication systems, all these kind of things that we sell to our customers as products. So about 5 years ago, we started a transition, and we started to move from a product-based economy to a services-based economy. It means like, we realized that there is nothing magic in our code that makes it irresistible to our customers to own it. They don't want to own our product because it's fantastic. No, they like our service. And we realized that the future was deliver our software as a service. So 5 years ago, we started a transition to software as a service. And that's the name of the product. The solution is DXC Assure. And at the core of DXC Assure, at the core of this SaaS solution, there is a component which is the platform, is the digital platform. So you can start already, linking the dots. As a platform, it's a SaaS, it's transition, building software platforms, a SaaS transition, a guide to SaaS transition with AWS, which is exactly what I try to capture in the book. Is my experience during the last 5 years from a technology point of view, how to start to decompose and migrate large monoliths into more cohesive and decoupled services, doing it using now what we call a platform approach at the core, doing it everything on AWS, because as I said, when you are doing software as a service, you own all the costs, the cost of the assets in their totality. You have the TCO. So we decided to go full with AWS. It's like, okay, we don't have a multi-cloud requirement. We don't have a portability requirement. We deliver our customers, all what they care about is that we give them the best insurance functionality through the internet. Whether we deploy that on AWS or Google Cloud is like you and me when we watch Netflix. We don't care. Just give me a good service.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. There's actually a lot of really interesting stuff to unpack there, and I like the way you're linking the actual work that you're doing to the book and how it came out of that. And so just to start at the sort of very, like, we'll get to the really interesting stuff, but just to start at the basic level. So you make these insurance products, and you provide these insurance services. Are those two insurance companies? Is that who your customers are?
Yes, right. That's right. That's right. Our customers are large and small insurance carriers. So yeah, insurance companies.
Okay.
That's right.
Okay, so hopefully that will let me now build an analogy to make sense of what you're, to sort of fill out the sort of picture of what you're saying. But so, in the past, if you wanted to say run a web company, you had a room in the back with servers in it, and you had to actually buy them. You had racks. You sort of had like a person to sort of put them in the racks and make sure they all talk to each other and then talk to the internet appropriately. And you had to have this physical thing that you were maintaining in your business, but then eventually that went away, and you could have this sort of up in the cloud, and analogous, and also in the olden days, if you wanted a web browser, you went to the store and you bought the product and you took it home and you sort of installed it on your computer, and then you had that product. Nowadays, of course, what you would do is you would download the browser application from the web, and not only would you have it, it would update all the time as well. I'm trying to build up the idea that, so if you're, let's say I'm CEO of an insurance company, and I want some software to do something. In the past, what you would do is you would probably build it. You would maybe hire a team of programmers to build it yourself, which is the analogy to having the servers in the back of the room. But eventually what people sort of maybe transitioned towards was actually like having a company provide them with the software in a sort of less sort of like in-house way. But then there's been this shift towards actually providing this, realizing that you don't need to provide them with this product, you can provide them with the service. Am I kind of, and I'm kind of getting it?
Totally. Yes, yes,
Okay.
yes.
And
Yep.
one of the really interesting things that happened too with particularly with things like AWS is that instead of the having to have like I've got 10 servers or whatever it is, right? I can actually only use exactly what's being used by my customers. So it's only when people are kind of hitting my website that I'm using these servers in the cloud, and that's all that I'm paying for. And I gather one of the things that's really driven that sort of kind of work that you've been doing is realizing that like you can build services that are only paid for when they're
That
used
that
when they're used.
that is correct, Len. So there is nothing in the principles of software as a service that says that you have to do it on the cloud. Or let me put it another way. There is nothing on the principles of the software as a service and the service economy that says that you couldn't do it on-prem with bare metal under your desk. There is nothing. It just happens that it doesn't make sense. It doesn't scale, right? If you are providing a service to your customers, yes, it could make sense that you own everything. You own the hardware where your software is installed. But why do you want to cosplay as a cloud provider these days? You don't want to cosplay as a cloud provider. That's their job. Managing hardware and servers is their job now in 2021. So if I use those services as a utility, then for me it's even easier to translate those costs into software as a service. What I mean is, if I am paying for what I consume in terms of infrastructure, for me, for my internal calculations, it's easier to uh, transform that into a price per use of the software as well, right? Because there is a closer connection between what I pay and what I sell as a subscription, right? Of course, in the middle there is labor and there's a lot of things, but you know now the relationship is kind of closer. And of course, when you are doing software as a service, you are hitting the long tail. It's like, well, anybody can subscribe to it. I don't know. I don't have even a business model or prediction how many users are going to use it. So I want it to scale. I don't want to be going downstairs every day to rack up more servers because I got 2,000 more clients. No, if I got 2,000 more clients, AWS is going to scale it for me. So that's why, again, there is nothing in the principles of SaaS that says that you cannot do it on-prem with bare metal, but it doesn't make sense. It doesn't scale. And that's where also I talk about this in the book a lot. And also I talk about build versus buy patterns, which is something that I'm not sure if you if you wanted to cover that as
Oh,
well.
that was my very next question. So if you could talk a little bit about this distinction, what's the difference between a build pattern versus a buy pattern, and from whose perspective are we thinking? Who's got the pattern? Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. Well, the pattern is everywhere. When you are a builder and when you're a consumer. So, for example, and Jeff Lawson, who is the CEO of Twilio, and he speaks. Well, he wrote a lot about this in his book, Ask Your Developer, which is a book that I absolutely love, and is actually one of my inspirations to my own book. He says, well, it's not actually build versus buy; it's build and buy, because there are some situations where you need to build and some situations where you need to buy, and they are not mutually exclusive. I mean, it depends that for some components you need to buy the components, but for others you build it. So and again, I talk about this a lot in the book. And so when do you build? Well, you build when you've got something that is core to your business and when you need full control, when it is so critical to make your company different from the competition that you need to build it. And typically in a post-pandemic world, this is typically user experience or customer experience. So everything that is exposed to my customers, where I offer them ways of acquiring my services. In this case, an insurance company is buying, a insurance policy. Is I want full control of that. I want to build it. So my customers who are insurers, I would recommend them go and build your customer-facing portals. Of course, here there are nuances that again I'll talk about them in the book. I don't want to leave my customers alone. It's like, oh, go and build it. No, it's go and build it, but I'm gonna offer you components. I'm gonna offer you a framework. I'm gonna offer you a design system. I'm gonna offer you, a small component so you can build your product. Even there are even customers who say, yeah, thank you, yeah, DXC, you are giving me all these tools, but I don't have the manpower. It's like, okay, then we can partner and we can do it together. When do you buy? Well, you buy when there is something that is not important. It's just cost of doing business. For example, in my company, DXC, internally, we've got SAP to manage the financials and Workday to manage HR. Do you imagine DXC buying our own HR system for 140,000 people? No, like, okay, buy it. It's core? No, because we are not an HR company. We are an IT services company. So we buy it. So today, those are the kind of things that you buy when it's not core to your business. It's not going to make you different. I mean, do you think that DXC is different from our competitors because we've got Workday? No. It's cost of doing business. So that's when you buy. And this is very interesting because again, I'll talk about this in the book a lot. Is some people and some companies, for them it's so important that they recognize what is core to them, and that's the key question. Is like, when do I build, when do I buy? Well, the answer is very easy. If it is core to you, build it. If it is not core and it's just cost of doing business, it's not giving you any competitive advantage, then buy it. They don't know how to answer that question. It's like, well, I don't know if this is core to me. Well, yes, I can buy Workday, of course, but Workday out of the box, or ServiceNow out of the box, is not giving me what I need for my unique HR process. It's like, your HR process is not unique. It's just cost of doing business. It's just an HR process. You must adapt your process to the tool, not the other way around. So you can focus on your core business. And your core business, in the case of DXC, is selling IT services. In an insurance company, is selling more policies. In a car manufacturer, is just selling more cars.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. Actually, one of the things I really liked about the explanation you gave there, which was very good, was you captured the fact. I mean, particularly at the end there when you were talking about how do I know what's core though? It's actually not necessarily straightforward, and especially before you've actually gone down the path of the technological path that you're going to have to go down, right? The decisions that you're going to make along the way are sort of determined by the decision about what you make is core, but you kind of might find out at the end that what's core is not what exactly. Is not what you thought. Exactly. And that sort of actually gives us the opportunity to bring up something a little bit fun, because your book is, building software platforms, a guide to SaaS transition with AWS, and it's for companies who might want to build internal software platforms with the architectural style that you set out to make this work. And you talk a lot about how this is learning how to empower the developers within your company to sort of create the kind of tools that your company needs, but not just for the specific things. It's like there's a higher level principle that this book is one kind of instance of, I think that you start the book by showing that that's true by talking about a restaurant. And so I was wondering if you could talk, and you have a good joke, so you thought this was a software book, but now we're learning about gastronomy. But I was wondering if you could actually talk a little bit about that example that you gave at the beginning.
Right. Yes, it's a very funny example, and I don't even remember how it came, but it has been always kind of in the back of my mind. So there is a restaurant in Spain called El Bulli, which is actually probably the best restaurant of all time. And the main chef of El Bulli is Ferran Adrià, and Ferran was known because in the late 90s, when El Bulli was already enjoying a leading position, 2 Michelin stars, amongst the best places in the world, he was like, so what? It's like, and he went conference to conference, and he watched how other chefs, they expressed what they were doing, presenting what they were doing, but they were keeping the secrets and the recipes to them. They were not sharing that to them, to the world. So Adria, that triggered Adria's, creativity, and said, "It's over. I'm gonna open source my recipes and my techniques," and that's what he did. So of course he didn't use the word open source. Now we know that in back in 2021, even probably if you ask him, he doesn't know what the open source word means. Well, maybe he does. He's a very smart guy. But what he did was, I'm gonna open source my recipes, because he thought that the best way of protecting an idea was actually making it public. So by doing that, this was a smart move, because what happened after that was that um, El Bulli and all the competitors were started to compete in equal conditions of practices, of techniques. It's like, okay, everybody knew what Adria and El Bulli were doing, and the techniques and the products, everything. So all the restaurants around the world started to use molecular gastronomy, and they started to acquire all the tools, and they started to compete in equal conditions. So by doing that, actually, what happened was that, maybe without knowing, Adrian and El Bulli, they created an standard, an industry standard. And they created the standard just by making it public. It's like everybody uses it. It's a standard. So that's how a standard appear. It's like, if everybody use it, that's a standard. And they created a standard by open sourcing recipes and tools and techniques. So again, all the restaurants started to compete in equal conditions. But El Bulli, what happened was that differentiated from the rest by how they cook the dishes they made. It's like, the dishes they made with equal conditions, with equal practices, with equal raw materials, they were still the best, because they differentiated themselves in service, in operations, in customer experience. So you could get exactly the same dish in El Bulli or in your local restaurant, because the techniques were exactly the same and the raw materials were exactly the same. But why they weren't? Why your local restaurant couldn't do what El Bulli was doing? Because El Bulli was differentiating in service, customer experience, and operations. And that is a lesson to the industry, to the tech industry, in that when you are enjoying a leading position as a product, and you've got a very competitive landscape, it could be a very good move to open source your product, to stop competing on the product and start competing on the service. And who's the master of doing that is AWS. AWS, they are the masters of industrialization. Of course, there are always some challenges and situations, like what happened with Elastic as well. But at the end of the day, they are masters of industrialization. And the net of it is, um, companies that are moving today in the product economy, if they want to preserve their competitive advantage and still lead in the coming years, they need to move to a services economy, because that's where, at the end, the evolution and the industrialization goes.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. The lesson to be drawn from that, and the sort of courage and the balls of what they did is really incredible. But it makes me think. When we were talking before about how do I know what's core or what I want to be core to my business? Well, do an exercise, right? If you've got any proprietary technology or secrets, imagine everyone knew them and imagine everyone had them, right? Then what would you be doing to compete? And this is a really good exercise for thinking about how
Exactly.
that I learned from your book about how to really
And
come to grips with what it is you are doing and what you want to be doing and what you can do and where you can compete.
Exactly. And in the book, I use a technique which is called worldly maps. That again, the creator, I quote Simon Wardley, who's the creator of the technique, a lot in the book because he's got brilliant quotes, and he also envisioned where the tech industry was going in 2008. In 2008, he was already talking about serverless. I mean, not with the word serverless. He called that something like runtime utilities or something like that. But he envisioned already. Even he was the CEO of a company which they did something like AWS Lambda is doing today. They did JavaScript runtime as a service. Again, in a small company, and he envisioned where the industry were going. And then he developed this technique which is called worldly maps, which is giving you movement and position. You place the different elements of your business or even your architecture in a map, and you can easily see the dynamics of what is custom built, where the things are evolving, where the competition is happening, where do I get the market push, where my next move should be, here or here. Should I buy or build it? Well, if it is core, you build it. If it is not core, you externalize because, well, it's a very industrialized utility. So Worldly Maps is an excellent tool to build and develop strategies.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. That was on my list to talk to you about. I was also introduced to this idea, the idea of wordly maps from your book. And let me see if I can sort of grasp it sort of quickly for people. But imagine you've got an x-axis and a y-axis, and the x-axis starts on the left with a technology that's completely unique to you, and then as you further go right, the more universal and sort of, as it were, commodified it becomes. And then the vertical axis, the y-axis, is starting at the bottom, is totally not user facing, completely internal to your system, and then at the top is exactly what the user sees. And I think a lot of people listening to this would come from this sort of like nerdy kind of business background, like I do to some extent. Would be immediately thinking of a quadrant, but that would be the wrong way to think of it. It's not. There's a kind of like, you can imagine there's the sort of drawing a line through this grid, that where the movement is through time, right? And so you can actually sort of, is that kind of right? Is that one way you could use a wordly map to plot my movement through
Exactly.
this table?
Exactly.
Okay,
And,
okay.
and that is what, and Simon Wardley, there's a lot of material. Simon is very kind because all his work is Creative Commons. And it's a lot of videos of Simon Wardley talking about this in YouTube. And he continuously talk about what is the difference between a graph and a map. So a graph is typically an architectural diagram. Website, users, servers. When you put that on a white paper, and you got a graph. The difference between a graph and a map is that the map gives you position and movement. It tells you where you are, comparing yourself to the climate, where to the competition, to your context. There's this term that he uses. It gives you situational awareness with regards to your elements. Again, it's very important because typically what we use in business to draw our strategies are SWOT analysis, graphs, roadmaps. That is giving you kind of position, if you like, right? But it doesn't give you movement. You don't know what you can. It's very difficult to understand where the competition is happening. What elements are more industrialized than the others? I should never compete, with things that are already industrialized, compete with a product. I mean, I should never build a product where a utility already exists, because the utility is going to win the market. But if there isn't a product for something, maybe I need to custom build it. All these kind of things is what Worldly Maps gives you and allows you to identify what are the market pressures and see, okay, my next move would be um, industrializing my life cycle automation, or industrializing the way I build front ends, for example. I should partner with someone who is building it for me so I can focus on something else. If the market of insurance application is already commoditized and there are utilities, I should go for that and focus myself on other stuff. That's movement.
And it lets you account for timing.
Very, very, very much.
Yeah,
very
which is
much.
something you talk about really well about AWS in particular. That it's not as it were only sort of building the products that people need, but it's like building the products that people need and releasing them at the right time is crucial.
Yeah, AWS is very, very good at meeting their customers where they are. I mean, they don't push you to use technology that you don't want to use. And this is a name that I learned. This is a German name, Zeitgeist. Well, probably is a word that I think you English native speakers use as well, but that's new to me. So it means literally, I think it means the ghost of time, Zeitgeist, I think, which is, understanding and be empathic with, have some empathy with the time you're living in, right? And understanding what are the context of the society, and in this case, your users, your customers, understanding what are their problems, and giving them a solution exactly where they are, exactly the solutions they need. That solution may not be exactly where you want to be in 5 years, but take them by the hand, show them the way, and gradually with them walk the journey while you show them how to evolve the journey you want to do. And AWS is very good at that, because when they started AWS Lambda in 2014, it was a very, that's a different case, because actually the problem with that was that it was very aggressive. Nobody used it, and they need to revert it to make it less aggressive. But, for example, if AWS EFS is a very good example, because they started, or step functions, another good example. They started very simple with a very, very basic, pretty basic state machine functionalities, giving customers low code ability to write state machines. Gradually, they started to add more and more and more functionality. So they master MVPs. They give you an MVP, and when you use that MVP that in 2 years' time, they're going to invest. In 2 years' time, they're going to give you another 1,000 functionalities out of the box, and it will cost you nothing.
I think since we've been talking for about an hour now, we should probably move on to the last part of your interview, where we talk about, sorry for the abrupt transition, but sometimes it happens with timing,
No,
unfortunately. But yeah, it's been a great conversation. We could talk about this forever, but I mean, that's one of the reasons people should go out and buy the book.
Exactly.
So speaking about the book, that we say this for the last part of the interview, where we talk about your experience as writing and as an author. And I was just wondering, what was do you remember the moment or the period of time when you realized you kind of had a book in you about this kind of thing, and
Totally.
when you made the decision? Okay.
Totally. The hardest part of building software platforms is adoption, because it's a new architectural style. It's a new way of building tools for empowering developers, and adoption at the beginning for us, it was kind of hard. My customers, in this case, as a platform architect and product manager, are developers. The 1,000 plus developers are my customers, and adoption was hard. And even I'm very happy with the exit, because full support and sponsorship, they really understood that was the way to go. But in any case, adoption is hard. And I remember I started to write notes in preparation for meetings with other directors, meeting with customers, meeting with peers, to explain them what is a platform, what are the benefits for them, what is the platform all about, technically from a point of view, what is a platform, why going serverless and embracing the cloud is important. And I started to write notes to support some presentations, decks. And after a few months, even a couple of years, I realized, oh my God, how many notes do I have? And it's like, I have a book. So look at this. If I write story about this, and I remember at the time I was learning also about worldly maps, and say, oh my God, if I glue up all these notes with some wording maps concepts and all the things I'm learning about AWS, I think I've got a compelling book. So that's what I did. I started to glue up all these notes with some wording and trying to make a smooth story and a guide to SaaS transition. And this is how the book was born.
And how did you have a schedule for writing? Were you like, I'm going to get up 5 a.m. and get in 2 hours before I go to work, or did you work on the weekends or
No,
things like that?
you know, and this is the first time I say this, but I wrote my book walking, and there's a lot of meaning of what I'm saying. So Saturday morning, Sunday morning, even weekdays in the morning, I go out and do some 1 hour, 1.5 hour walking. I don't know what happens to your brain, but I remember that like 1,000 ideas came to my mind, and I made another 1,000 voice notes about this and this and this and this, and then and I came and say, oh yeah, I'm gonna write this down. And I would say that the most compelling ideas, if there are compelling ideas, I mean, the reader should tell me that, came to me while walking. It's incredible, and I'm very avid Twitter user, and I heard that from a couple of Twitter users as well. Like for example, Sarah Drasner, who is now engineering director for Angular in Google, and Sasha Rosenbaum, who is a leading position in DevOps in Red Hat. They say this a lot, that they like to walk, they like walking, because there's a lot of ideas, come and something happens to your brain in those moments, and it happened to me.
That's really fascinating. I think you're the first person to talk about writing their book while walking that we've had on the podcast. There is an ancient kind of heritage for that. There was, I think it might have been Plato's Academy, where they were called the Peripatetics, because they would walk around while lecturing. Rather than standing, someone standing somewhere and then speaking to people sitting before them, you would go on a walk. And a lot of people think, oh, that's just a sort of way of keeping the students occupied or something, but it's also for the person speaking, because it kind of, gets the juices flowing. I guess
maybe that's right.
I gather too that the sort of the Romans back in the Roman days were notorious for walking around at times and places when people didn't just go for walks, and the people thought they were crazy, right? Because they go for walks.
Yeah.
But I've always thought, what, I bet a big part of that, and I'm not talking about sort of peasants, I'm talking about the generals and the aristocrats and stuff.
Yes.
They would have ambulatoriums, like they would build things for you to walk around in.
I see.
And I always used to think it was partly, for that, to get thoughts and conversation going.
Those things fascinated me. I mean, these are fascinating things, how the human brain works, and this is fascinating.
Yeah. And I, by the way, again, I totally sympathize. I mean, I sort of like have to keep myself from talking to myself with all the ideas that come when I'm walking around. Yep. And probably at least having something I could pretend I'm making voice notes or something would make me look less crazy. And so you wrote the book in this sort of very interesting way, and then eventually you decided to publish it, and you decided to publish it. It's in print on Amazon, but it's also available on LeanPub. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about why you chose LeanPub as the platform.
Well, I was a user of LeanPub before I wrote my book. So I purchased a couple of books here. For example, well, I can say there's a very good book on cloud strategy by Gregor Hope, which is, I think, one of the most it's a best-selling book in LeanPub, and I own that, a copy of that. And also being an agilist, the first time I heard about LeanPub, the first thing that came to my mind was the lean word. It's like lean, okay. And even without looking on Google what LeanPub was about, I got it. It's lean publication. It's LeanPub. It's like, okay, this seems to be some sort of a way where you are publishing an MVP of your book and then you iterate. It's like, oh yeah, that's it. So it literally clicked to me and say, right, if one day I write a book, I think I'm gonna use this, and also because I think it's a very good platform, full of choices. Being on Limpub already is a honor for me. It's like even you can publish it, it's fine. But if my book is amongst other brilliant books on the platform, and to me, already that is a honor.
Oh, thanks very much for those kind words. It's funny you say Leanpub clicked with you right away, because there are people for whom that happens, but we also occasionally get the occasional kind of snarky Brit who's like, I thought it was a bar that only sold diet beer or something like that.
Well, yeah,
A
that
lean
too.
pub, but in another universe or another timeline, that's what we did.
Exactly.
And I mentioned, so your book is available in print on Amazon, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you did that. How did you get your book in print?
Oh, it was very easy with Limpub. It was very, very easy. I think I subscribe to the standard or even professional. I don't recall now. I think it's a standard. And with the standard, you can have a free print ready copy of your book that you can go and
Okay.
upload to Amazon. It was very, very easy. So yeah, that
Oh, okay, yeah, thanks very much for sharing that. Yeah, no, we have a print ready PDF option where you write your book, and if you write your book in one of our writing modes, you can click a button, and then you do some settings, but you can basically click a button and get the file you need to use print on demand services like Amazon, KDP, and
exactly.
Lulu and things like that. And I mean, and so I'm glad to hear it was easy. We hear that from some people, but since I've been there for the whole development of it, it's kind of like it always surprises me that it works. But it's only because of working closely and talking to people like you over the years that it does work now. But the last question I actually always say for a guest as a Lean Pub author is, if there was one magical feature we could build for you, or one terribly annoying thing about Lean Pub that we could fix for you,
Yeah.
can you think of anything you would
There's
ask us?
one is
Okay.
resources management. Is how pictures are managed in the writing mode.
Okay.
It was a kind of a, well, not a pain, but for example, I find it. I think my book has about 50 figures and pictures, and it was hard to manage those 50. I think I got a very flat view of them whenever I wanted to replace one picture with another. I found it a little bit difficult because I look like replacing. There is no good way of replacing a picture with another one. You need to delete the previous one and upload it. At least maybe that's me. I didn't find a way. But if I didn't find a way, that also means that there is some UX part of it which needs to be fine tuned. But for the rest, I found it very usable,
Oh,
very
thanks for
straightforward. It's like, go write your book. There's a write tab there. You click on write and you start writing, and that's it.
Yeah, thanks very much for that. Actually, that's really helpful for us to know. Actually, I feel guilty. I didn't actually look to see what writing mode you'd used before the interview, but I'm
Web.
looking at it right now. Yeah, you used the browser web writing mode, where we give you a write tab in the browser and you just write there. And although in some ways, like when it comes to just writing words, it's super straightforward. You can click a plus button and create a new
Yes.
chapter, and you type a
Oh, that
pound sign and you get
very
ahead.
easy. And the
Yeah.
Marqua language, is it Marqua, the name, right? Is
Markua is how we pronounce it.
Marqua,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Is,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. That
Very easy to follow. Very well documented as well. I found
oh
a very comprehensive document on the internet. So
oh
yeah.
that's good to hear. Yeah, it's our version of Markdown for books, basically for anyone listening who sort of knows what that means. And but when it comes to images, so we have we on the right tab in the browser, we have a manuscript section, which is where you type your words out and stuff like that, and then we have a resources section where you upload images, and then you can click a little link, if you a little button, or and then that gives you the Markua text that you need, that you can just paste in to your manuscript. But yes, the way that looks and the way that is managed is in need of improvement.
Yeah.
And it's actually interesting. I'd never particularly thought of the situation of needing to replace an image before. And basically, what you would have to do is you would have to make sure to copy the file name. You would delete the image that's on there, and then you would add a new one. But then where the new image has been added would be at the bottom of the list, basically.
Exactly.
And that would be confusing and kind of nerve wracking. You'd
Yeah.
want to do a new preview right away to make sure it was working and stuff like that. And that's
After a
definitely
few months, I found my way to do it, but at the beginning it was a little bit confusing. But yeah, I think that's my off the top of my head, that's what I have.
Yeah, no, thanks very much for that. The other another sort of limitation of the resources tab there is that if you have, I mean, you said you've got about 50 images or so. That's kind of manageable. Some people
Yep.
have books with hundreds of images, and if you have hundreds
Exactly.
of images, you would actually want something a little bit more robust than what we have.
Like a file manager or something, whatever,
Yeah. We'll definitely think about how to do that better. Well, Pablo, thank you very much for taking the time out of what I'm sure was a beautiful evening in Spain, up in the north there, and to be on the podcast. And thank you very much for being a Lean Pub author.
Thanks to you, Len.
Thanks. And as always, thanks to all of you for listening to this episode of the Front Matter podcast. If you like what you heard, please rate and review it wherever you found it. And if you'd like to be a Lean Pub author yourself, please check out our website at leanpub.com. Thanks.